The folding chair under me let out a slow, ugly squeak, like it didn't approve of what was about to happen. Coffee, burnt and cheap, hung in the air of that church fellowship hall, mixing with wet wool coats and a faint whiff of lemon cleaner. A wall clock ticked loud enough to count your mistakes. I could hear somebody's breath catch. Somebody else's wedding ring click against a styrofoam cup. Evan Caldwell stood near the coffee-urn shoulders, squared face pale in that flat fluorescent light. He looked from my thin manila folder to Kendra, my stepdaughter, and then to Marla, my wife. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something he didn't want to swallow. Then he looked at me. And in a voice that wasn't angry, just wounded and steady, he said, "That's not what I was told, and it hurts more than you know." The room froze. Not the kind of silence you get when people are being polite. The kind you get when the truth walks in and everyone realizes it doesn't care who's comfortable. I didn't smile. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. All I could think was I raised her. I was there. And they were trying to erase me like a smudge on a window. 2 days earlier, I was still standing in my own kitchen in Rockford, Illinois, with the smell of pumpkin pie in the air and a sentence hanging between us that would change the rest of my life. It was the Monday before Thanksgiving when I found out I wasn't invited to my own family story. Rockford was wearing its late November face gray sky, pressed down low wind off the Rock River, slicing through your jacket like it had a grudge. The slush in the Members Plus Credit Union parking lot had turned that dirty brown, the kind that makes you wipe your boots twice before you step inside anywhere decent. I'd just gotten off a job on East State Street rewiring an old storefront that still smelled like mildew and stale perfume from whatever business had been there before. I'm a union electrician IBEW, so my days are steady. Wires don't care about your feelings. They only care if you do it right. That's always been my comfort. In my trade, if you cross the wrong wire, something trips. Sometimes something burns. But at least the rules are the rules. Family, I'd learned, can bend those rules until you don't recognize yourself. I walked into our house, our modest ranch off Alpine Road, with my hands still smelling faintly like metal and insulation. Marla had the kitchen warm oven humming that sweet, spicy smell of pie and cinnamon rolling through the place like a promise. She was wearing her company face even though it was just me. Hair done, lipstick on, like she was rehearsing being pleasant. Kendra texted, she said, not looking up from the counter. I loosened my jacket. "Everything all right?" She and Evan are coming by Wednesday, just to say hi before they head out. Head out where? Marla paused. It was small, just a half-second pause. But I've wired enough old houses to know the difference between a steady hum and a dangerous flicker. "To meet Evan's family," she said. I blinked. "Here." "No, in Madison." "Madison. Not far, but far enough that you pack a bag. Far enough that you make a plan." "And I'm going too," I asked, because that's what you do when your stepdaughter legally gets engaged. You show up, you shake hands, you smile, you act grateful somebody loves your kid. Marla kept smoothing pie dough like it had offended her. "It's just going to be me." Something cold slid down my spine, and it wasn't the weather. "Why?" I asked. She sighed like I'd asked her to explain gravity. "Frank, it's complicated." That phrase, people use it like a blanket. Like if they throw it over the truth, you'll stop looking at the shape underneath. "Kendra's bringing Darren," she said quietly. I stared at her. Darren Miles. Marla finally met my eyes. Hers were tired, not guilty exactly. Just resigned. Like she'd already decided what was easier. "Kendra wants her dad there," Marla said. "Evan's family is traditional." I almost laughed, but it came out wrong. "Traditional," I repeated. "So I'm what bad manners?" "Frank." I held up a hand. "I've been in this house 17 years, Marla. I've paid for half the things in it. I've fixed every broken outlet and leaky bathroom fan and busted porch light. I've driven Kendra to school when your car wouldn't start. I signed for her first reliable car when she was 19 because Darren was nowhere to be found." Marla's mouth tightened. "Don't do that." "Don't do what?" "Make it about money." I felt my face go hot. "It's not about money. It's about being there." Marla turned back to the pie. "It's one meeting, Frank." "One meeting," I said slow. "The meeting where the families look each other in the eye and decide who belongs." She didn't answer. The oven fan kicked on. Somewhere in the living room, the old grandfather clock ticked. Tick, 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 like time was keeping score. That night I didn't say much. I ate the chili Marla put in front of me. I rinsed my bowl. I wiped down the counter out of habit the way I always did. I marked my work hours in my little pocket calendar because that's who I am, steady, careful, the kind of man who believes life is mostly a series of small responsibilities done right. But my chest felt tight, not like a heart attack, like something was being squeezed down to a point. The next morning, the betrayal showed up on my phone before my coffee finished dripping. I was standing in the kitchen in my socks watching the coffee maker sputter and spit when a notification popped up Facebook. I don't live on it, but I keep it because Kendra posts pictures there. Sometimes Marla does too when she wants to show the world we're happy. It was a photo from Kendra. She'd posted it late the night before, probably thinking I wouldn't see it. There they were, Kendra in a dress coat, hair curled, smiling like she'd won something. Marla beside her, hand on Kendra's arm, and Darren Miles standing on the other side like a proud father. Like he hadn't missed birthdays and school concerts and one ugly winter when Kendra got sick, and we sat in an ER waiting room for 6 hours under fluorescent lights that made everyone look dead. Behind them was a restaurant sign in Madison, the kind with string lights and a chalkboard menu. In the caption, Kendra had written, "Family night. So grateful to have Dad here for this." Dad. My thumb hovered over the screen. I felt a dull ringing in my ears, and for a second I was back in the Navy, 19 years old, standing on a cold deck, trying to keep my face neutral while the wind slapped you around. You learn to keep your expression steady. You learn to swallow your words. But I wasn't 19 anymore. I was 56, and my own kid was calling someone else Dad like I'd never existed. Marla came into the kitchen, still in her robe, hair a mess, now that the company face wasn't needed yet. She saw my phone. She saw my expression. "Oh, Frank," she said, like she'd stepped in something. "Kendra posted it," I said quietly. Marla's shoulders lifted and fell. "She's excited." I turned the phone so she could see the caption. Her eyes flicked over it. She didn't flinch. She didn't defend me. She just said, "Darren's trying. This is important to Kendra." "What about what's important to me?" I asked. My voice didn't crack. I didn't let it. Marla looked away, and in that moment I understood something that hurt worse than the Facebook post. Her silence wasn't confusion. It was agreement. The front door opened, then Kendra breezing in like she owned the air-cold wind, following her cheeks pink from outside. She smelled like fancy perfume and winter air. "Hey," she said bright. "Mom, Frank." Not Dad, not even Frank with warmth, just a label. I held up my phone. "So you met Evan's family?" Kendra's smile faltered for half a second. "Yeah." "And you took Darren?" She shrugged like I'd asked if she'd picked up milk. "He's my dad." The words hit, but the next ones hit harder. Kendra's eyes went sharp. "Look, don't make this into a thing. Evan's family is like that. They wanted a classy first impression." "And I'm not classy?" I asked. Kendra exhaled, impatient. "Frank, you're not my father." The kitchen was warm. The coffee maker hissed. The pumpkin pie smell hung in the air like a memory of something sweet. And still I felt cold. Marla said nothing. I stared at Kendra, at this grown woman I'd helped raise, and I felt something in me go quiet and heavy. I whispered because I didn't trust my voice any louder than that. "Okay," I said, "I got it." Kendra blinked, almost surprised I didn't fight. Marla kept staring at the counter like it could save her. I walked past them down the hallway into the bedroom, and I grabbed my jacket. My hands were steady, but my stomach was twisting like a wire being pulled too tight. Behind me, Kendra called out, "We're leaving tomorrow morning. Don't be weird about it." I didn't answer. Because in my trade, when a line is dead, you stop feeding it power. And something inside me had just gone dead. The next morning, I found out they didn't just want me quiet. They wanted me invisible. And the pounding on my apartment door, hard enough to rattle the cheap frame, told me they weren't done using me yet. The knocking didn't stop when I stayed quiet. It got louder. Sharp, angry, the kind of knocking that assumes you owe somebody something. I stood in the narrow kitchen of my apartment off Alpine Road, barefoot on cold laminate, watching the second hand on the wall clock sweep past the 12. Tick, tick, tick. The radiator clanked like it had opinions. Somewhere upstairs, a neighbor's TV laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. I already knew who it was. I opened the door anyway. Marla pushed past me, first coat, half-zipped eyes blazing, like she'd rehearsed this speech in the car. Kendra followed, jaw-tight, phone already in her hand like evidence. "What is wrong with you?" Marla said the second the door shut behind them. I stepped back to give them room. The apartment smelled faintly of last night's coffee and the lemon cleaner the building used in the hallways. It wasn't much. A couch I'd bought secondhand, a small table, my boots lined up by the door toes, pointing out habit drilled in by years of not wanting to trip in the dark. Kendra crossed her arms. "You didn't answer my texts." "I got them," I said. "Then why didn't you respond?" Marla jumped in. "You've been acting strange, Frank. Silent. Cold." I looked at her. I said, "Okay." "That's not an answer," she snapped. "That's nothing. You're acting like we did something wrong." Kendra let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah, like we betrayed you or something." The word hung there. Betrayed. My chest tightened, and for a second, I felt that pressure behind my eyes, the kind that comes right before you say something you can't take back. I could feel it climbing up my throat. 17 years worth of swallowed comments lining up ready to charge out all at once. I thought of standing watch in the Navy, late 80s, Lake Michigan wind, whipping across the deck during training drills. How you learned to keep your jaw set and your mouth shut because losing your cool didn't warm you up or get you home faster. I took a breath instead. "What do you want?" I asked. Marla threw her hands up. "We want to understand why you're being like this." "Like what?" "Like we erased you," Kendra said, sarcasm dripping. I met her eyes. "You did." Silence cracked across the room like a breaker flipping. Marla stared at me. "Frank, you went to meet his family," I said, calm, steady. "You took Darren. You told them he was your father, and you told me not to come." Kendra scoffed. "It was just one meeting." "Those meetings matter," I said. "They're where people decide who you are." Marla shook her head. "You're making this bigger than it is." I felt something twist inside me. "Am I?" Kendra stepped forward. "Evan's family is image conscious. They asked about stability, about background. It was easier this way." "Easier for who?" I asked. She hesitated. "Just a beat. Enough." "For everyone," she said finally. There it was. Marla rubbed her temples. "Frank, we needed this to go smoothly." I let out a short breath. "You needed my name, not me." Neither of them denied it. I looked around the apartment, the bare walls, the ticking clock, the coat rack with one jacket hanging from it. I'd moved out 3 weeks earlier, telling myself it was temporary. Space, Marla had called it. Like you could box up 17 years and stack it in a corner. Kendra gestured around. "See, this is what I mean. This vibe. It wouldn't have fit." Something snapped then, not loudly, internally, like a wire finally giving up. "I've worked the same trade for 30 years, I said, my voice low. "I show up on time. I pay my bills. I raised you when your dad was gone. If that doesn't fit, that's not my problem." Marla's face hardened. "You don't get to guilt trip her." "I'm not," I said. "I'm stating facts." Kendra rolled her eyes. "Evan's parents didn't even ask about you." That landed heavier than anything else she'd said. "They didn't ask," I repeated. "No," she said, "because they were told you weren't really involved." I stared at her. "Told by who?" She looked away. Marla's lips parted, then closed. And suddenly the room felt very small. "You told them," I said to Marla. Marla's voice dropped. I simplified. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You erased me." Marla snapped. I was protecting Kendra. "From what I asked, me." Kendra grabbed her purse. "This is pointless. You're acting like a martyr." I felt that surge again, anger, heat, words lining up. For a split second, I wanted to shout, to list every late night, every bill paid, every ride given in the snow. Instead, I stepped aside and opened the door. "I'm done with this conversation," I said. Marla stared at me like she didn't recognize me. "You're just walking away." "Yes." Kendra scoffed, real mature. They brushed past me, cold air rushing in from the hallway, then the door slammed. I locked it. The silence afterward was loud. The clock, the radiator, my own breathing. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the door, like it might explain itself. Then I grabbed my jacket and my keys and headed out. The wind outside cut straight through me. Rockford in late November doesn't care how you feel. Snow hadn't fully fallen yet, but the ground was slick with half-frozen slush gray and ugly under the streetlights. I drove without thinking, muscle memory taking over, until I pulled into the parking lot of VFW Post 1460 on East State Street. The sign buzzed faintly. Inside, it was warm in that tired way, old heat, old smells. Beer, coffee, cigarette smoke baked into the walls from decades ago, back when people smoked everywhere, and nobody apologized for it. A few guys sat at the tables, coats slung over chairs. Flags lined the walls, colors faded but still standing. Someone laughed low at the bar. Miller spotted me and slid a mug across the table without a word. Black coffee, strong enough to remind you it existed. "You all right, Frank?" he asked. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into my fingers. "Yeah," I said. "Just family stuff." Miller nodded like he understood more than I'd said. He didn't push. At the VFW, nobody pokes at wounds that don't bleed. We sat there in companionable silence. Outside the window, snow started to fall light at first, drifting down onto East State like it had nowhere better to be. I watched it for a long time. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it, then answered. "Hello?" "Mr. Hollis," a woman said. Her voice was polite, careful. "This is Linda Caldwell, Evan's mother." My grip tightened on the mug. "Yes," I said. "This is Frank." There was a pause. I hope I'm not calling it a bad time. I looked around the VFW at the flags, the men, the quiet dignity of the place. "No," I said. "It's fine." She took a breath. "I wanted to ask you something. We were told you were just a roommate, not really part of the family." The words slid under my ribs like ice. And for the first time since Kendra spoke that sentence in my kitchen, I knew staying quiet wasn't going to fix anything. I didn't answer Linda Caldwell right away. The VFW's coffee urn hissed behind me, a tired sound, like it had been boiling the same pot since Reagan was in office. Someone at the bar cleared their throat. A chair scraped against the floor. Normal sounds. Ordinary life. And still, that sentence sat there between us. Just a roommate. "I've never been anyone's roommate," I said finally. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I married Marla when her daughter was 9. I raised her." There was another pause, this one longer. "I see," Mrs. Caldwell said. "That's not how it was explained to us." I closed my eyes for a second, not in anger, in tired recognition. "I figured," I said. She cleared her throat. "Evan values honesty. So do we. I didn't mean to stir anything up, Mr. Hollis, but I thought you should know. I appreciate the call," I said, and I meant it. When we hung up, I sat there staring into my coffee until the surface stopped shaking. Miller leaned back in his chair. "Everything all right?" "Depends on how you define all right," I said. He nodded once. "Fair enough." I stayed another half hour watching the snow thicken outside the windows, then drove home slow and careful. The roads were already slick, the kind that punish impatience. Back at the apartment, I hung my jacket on the hook by the door and lined up my boots. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't want noise. I wanted to think. I pulled my small pocket calendar from my jacket, the one I'd carried for years. Old habit, write things down. Dates, payments, hours, proof that you showed up. I sat at the table and opened the drawer where I kept the boring stuff. Tax folders, old envelopes, receipts rubber banded together, life reduced to paper. I wasn't looking for leverage. I was looking for the truth. The first thing I found was the car paperwork. Kendra had been 19, scared and excited all at once, standing in a used car lot in Loves Park with a salesman who smiled too much. Her credit was thin. Darren hadn't returned her calls. "Can you help?" she'd asked me, then voice small. I'd signed without hesitation, because that's what you do. I ran my thumb over the faded ink, now remembering the smell of the office, cheap carpet, stale coffee, and the way she'd hugged me after, quick and awkward, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. Next was a hospital bill from years earlier. She'd needed a procedure. Nothing dramatic, but expensive enough that Marla had cried at the kitchen table calculator, out whispering numbers like they were prayers. I'd written the check, no speech, no resentment. Under that, an envelope with a school logo. Inside, a folded program from Kendra's high school graduation. My name scribbled on the back in my handwriting, left side bleachers. "Don't forget camera." I swallowed. Then I found something newer. A credit union notice I'd missed at the time, tucked into a stack of statements. A late payment that had almost dinged my credit. Almost. I remembered now. Kendra had asked to handle it, said it was a mix-up. I'd paid it quietly and moved on. At the time, I told myself that was fatherhood too, fixing things without making noise. Now, looking at it all spread out on the table, I realized something worse than being excluded from the future. They were rewriting the past. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. The light buzzed faintly. The radiator clanked again. In my trade, I said out loud to nobody, if you label a wire wrong, somebody gets hurt. I gathered 3 things and slid them into a thin manila folder. Not everything, just enough. The folder felt light in my hands, lighter than the weight sitting in my chest. My phone buzzed. A text from Marla. We need to talk. I didn't reply. Another text came in a few minutes later, this one from an unfamiliar email address. Mr. Hollis, we're holding a small family meeting at our church this Sunday afternoon before final wedding plans. If you're willing, we'd like you there. Linda Caldwell. I read it twice. Sunday. A public place, folding chairs, coffee urns, witnesses. I closed the folder and set it neatly by the door. If I was going to be spoken about, I decided I was done being spoken over. I read Linda Caldwell's email again on Sunday morning, even though I already knew what it said. The apartment was quiet in that early, empty way. No traffic yet, no neighbors clomping around upstairs. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall, keeping time like it always did, whether you were ready or not. I stood at the small kitchen table with a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands. Outside the window, Rockford looked washed out and tired. A thin crust of snow clung to the edges of the parking lot, gray with dirt the way winter settles in and refuses to be pretty. A family meeting. I'd spent most of the week telling myself I didn't care, that I'd already said my piece when I whispered okay in my kitchen and walked away. But the truth was, I cared enough to feel it in my shoulders when I woke up tight and sore, like I'd been bracing for a hit in my sleep. I showered, shaved, and put on my good jacket, the one without paint flecks on the sleeves. Habit again. You show respect when you walk into someone else's space, even if they didn't show it to you first. The folder sat on the table, thin and plain, no labels, no drama, half paperwork, half memories. I slid it under my arm and paused by the door. For a moment, I considered not going. It would have been easier to stay home, sit in the quiet, let them finish planning their lives without me. I'd done my part. That's what I told myself. But there was something about being called just a roommate that stuck like a burr under the skin. A lie repeated often enough starts to feel like truth to everyone, except the person it's about. I locked the door and headed out. The church was 10 minutes away, a modest brick building, tucked between a dentist's office and a row of small houses with bare trees out front. The parking lot was half full, minivans, sedans, sensible cars for sensible people. I sat in my truck for a full minute before getting out, hands resting on the steering wheel. My breath fogged the windshield. In the Navy, before inspections, you'd stand there and check your uniform one last time. Not because you were afraid of getting in trouble, but because order mattered. It said something about who you were. I straightened my jacket, grabbed the folder, and went inside. The fellowship hall smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner, just like I remembered from 100 church potlucks over the years. Folding chairs were arranged in uneven rows. A long table at the back held paper cups, sugar packets, and a coffee urn that gurgled and hissed like it was alive. People were already there. Evan stood near the window talking quietly with his parents. He looked nervous the way men do when they know something important is coming, but don't know which way it'll break. Kendra sat a few chairs away from them, scrolling on her phone. Marla was beside her, hands folded tight in her lap, eyes darting around the room like she was tracking exits. And Darren was there too. He sat closer to the front than anyone else, legs crossed arm, draped over the back of a chair like he belonged there. He wore a blazer that didn't quite fit and a smile that said he'd been welcomed in already. I felt that familiar twist in my gut, sharp and unwelcome. No one noticed me at first. I took a seat near the aisle, not front, not back, neutral ground. I rested the folder on my knee and folded my hands over it, keeping them still. Marla saw me then, her eyes widened just a fraction. "You came," she whispered when she leaned over. I said I would. She swallowed. "Frank, please, just don't make this harder than it has to be." I met her eyes. I won't speak unless I'm spoken to. That was the deal I'd made with myself. No speeches, no accusations, just truth if it was asked for. The Caldwells gathered everyone's attention a few minutes later. Mr. Caldwell, a tall man with thinning gray hair and a careful way of speaking, stood near the front. "We appreciate everyone coming," he said. "This is just a chance for families to be on the same page before moving forward." Same page. I shifted in my chair and felt the folder edge press into my knee. Mr. Caldwell looked around the room, smiling politely. Then his gaze landed on me. He hesitated like he was trying to place me. "And you are?" he asked. Before I could answer, Darren leaned forward. "That's Frank. He and Marla were married." We're past tense. Mr. Caldwell nodded slowly. "I see." I felt the words lining up in my throat, wanting out. I kept my mouth shut. Kendra stared at the floor. Evan shifted his weight, glancing between his parents and me, something unsettled crossing his face. The meeting moved on, talk of dates, venues, guest lists. I listened in silence the way I always had, letting other people talk, doing the quiet work. But I could feel it building. Every time Darren spoke like he'd always been there. Every time Marla stayed quiet when the story bent a little more. My jaw ached from clenching it. Finally, Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat again. "There's one thing I'd like to clarify," he said. His tone was still polite, but firmer now. "Frank, may I ask you something?" I looked up. "Yes," I said. And just like that, the room leaned in. Mr. Caldwell folded his hands in front of him the way men do when they're trying to stay calm and fair. "How long," he asked carefully, "have you been part of Kendra's life?" The question landed soft, but it carried weight. The fellowship hall went quiet enough that I could hear the coffee urn click as it shut itself off. I didn't rush to answer. I thought about the first time Kendra called me Frank instead of that guy my mom's dating. I thought about teaching her how to change a tire in the driveway while snow crept into our boots. I thought about the nights I waited up for her to get home, pretending I wasn't worried. 17 years, I said. I married Marla when Kendra was 9. Darren shifted in his chair. "Well, technically." I held up a hand, not looking at him. My eyes stayed on Mr. Caldwell. "I'm not here to argue technicalities," I said. "You asked how long I've been part of her life. That's the answer." Mr. Caldwell nodded slowly, and during that time, I felt the folder under my hand, the thin cardboard edge, the corners I'd smoothed flat that morning. "I was there," I said, consistently. Darren let out a short laugh. "Come on, you make it sound like..." Mr. Caldwell raised a finger, stopping him. "Let him finish." That was when I opened the folder. I didn't dump anything out. I didn't slide papers across the table like I was presenting a case. I took one document at a time, holding it only long enough to explain. "This is a cosign for Kendra's first car," I said. "She needed reliable transportation for school and work. Her biological father wasn't available." Darren's jaw tightened. "This is a medical bill," I continued, my voice steady. "From when she was 12, nothing dramatic, just something a family handles." I placed the paper back in the folder, careful, neat. "And this," I said, pulling out the graduation program, "is from her high school commencement. I sat on the left side bleachers so I could get a clear photo when she walked." Kendra looked up then. Her face had gone pale. I met her eyes for just a second, not accusing, not angry. Just honest. I didn't keep these to prove anything I said. I kept them because they were my life. The silence thickened. Evan's mother pressed her lips together. Evan stared at the floor, then up at Kendra. "Is that true?" he asked quietly. Kendra opened her mouth, closed it, her fingers curled tight around her phone. Darren leaned forward. "Look, this is getting blown out of proportion. I'm her father." Evan turned to him. "Then why wasn't any of this mentioned?" Darren shrugged. "Didn't seem relevant." That's when Marla spoke for the first time in a while. "I didn't think it mattered," she said softly. "We just wanted things to be smooth." Mr. Caldwell exhaled through his nose. "Smooth isn't the same as honest." No one argued. Evan stood up, running a hand through his hair. His voice was calm, but there was something broken in it. "That's not what I was told," he said, looking at Kendra now. "And it hurts more than you know." The words hung there, heavy and final. No one moved. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt tired. The kind of tired that settles in after you've carried something too long and finally set it down. Evan stepped back toward the door. "I need some air," he said. His parents didn't stop him. When the door closed behind him, the room seemed smaller. Darren stared straight ahead. Marla's shoulders slumped. Kendra's eyes shone with something that might have been regret or might have just been fear. I closed the folder and rested it on my knee again. I didn't come here to ruin anything, I said quietly. I came because I was asked a question. No one contradicted me. The clock on the wall ticked loud and steady. And for the first time in a long while, the truth had nowhere left to hide. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It spread. Like cold through a house with bad insulation, it crept into every corner over the next few days. By Monday morning, the phone calls started. Quiet ones, careful ones, people from church asking how I was holding up. One of Marla's friends leaving a voicemail that began with, "I don't want to take sides, but," and ended with silence. Marla didn't come home that night. I wasn't surprised. I was sitting at the small kitchen table in my apartment, my pocket calendar open in front of me, pen resting between my fingers, like I might still have somewhere to be. I kept checking the clock anyway. Old habits don't die clean. When she finally called, it was close to midnight. "I'm staying at my sister's," she said. Her voice sounded thin, like it had been stretched too far. "I need time." I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. The light buzzed faintly. Time for what I asked. To think she said, "You embarrassed Kendra. You embarrassed all of us." I let that sit for a moment. I answered a question, I said, in a room where I was invited. "You didn't have to say all of that," she snapped. "You didn't have to bring papers." They asked how long I'd been part of her life, I said. "What was I supposed to do, lie better than you did?" She sucked in a sharp breath. "That's not fair." "Neither was pretending I didn't exist," I said. The line went quiet. Then Marla said something she hadn't planned to. "I knew Darren had been talking to her," she admitted, "for months." My grip tightened on the phone. "You knew," I said. He was filling her head with things she rushed on, about how families look, about what Evan's parents would expect. I didn't think it would go this far. "But you let it," I said. "I didn't stop it," she whispered. That was the moment something in me finally shifted. Not anger, not even hurt, just clarity. "Marla?" I said. I stood watch in the Navy in the middle of the night, freezing my ass off, because when it's your post, you don't walk away. You left yours. She started to cry then. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't soften it either. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said. "I'm not pretending I'm optional." We hung up without saying goodbye. 2 days later, I sat across from a loan officer at Members Plus Credit Union, the same place I'd signed papers for years without thinking twice. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, snow had turned the parking lot into a gray soup of slush and tire tracks. "I'm not looking to punish anyone," I said, hands folded on the desk. "I just want things clean." The woman nodded. "That's usually the smartest way." We went over accounts, obligations, where my name still carried weight and where it shouldn't anymore. I made one decision that surprised even me. I didn't pull the emergency account I'd set aside for Kendra years ago. I signed it over fully, no strings, no speeches. "She's going to need it," I said simply, "but she won't need me tied to it." Walking out of that building, the cold hit hard. The wind off the Rock River cut straight through my jacket, and for a second I stood there letting it. In the Navy, you learn the difference between cold that hurts and cold that wakes you up. That night alone in my apartment, the silence felt heavier than before. The radiator clanked. The clock ticked. I thought about long nights on the ship when everyone else slept, and the only thing keeping you company was the dark water and your own thoughts. I'd never felt lonely then. This was different. My phone buzzed on the table. A text. "Unknown number. Frank, this is Evan. I'm sorry to reach out like this, but I think you deserve to hear something directly." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Go ahead." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I didn't know, not really, and once I did, I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. I set the phone face down and closed my eyes. Whatever was coming next, I knew one thing for certain. Telling the truth had cost me my marriage as I knew it. But for the first time in a long while, I could breathe. I met Evan 2 weeks later at a diner off North Main Street, the kind of place that never bothered to remodel because the coffee was hot and nobody rushed you out the door. Snow lined the curb outside in uneven piles, gray at the edges. Inside, it smelled like bacon-greased toast and burnt coffee, the good kind of ordinary. I was already there when he walked in, sitting in a booth by the window, my jacket hung on the hook, my pocket calendar tucked back where it always lived. Habit, proof to myself that I still belong somewhere in time. Evan spotted me and hesitated like he wasn't sure I'd changed my mind. Then he walked over. "Mr. Hollis," he said. "Frank," I corrected gently. "Sit." He slid into the booth across from me, hands clasped tight in front of him. He looked tired, not angry, just worn down by disappointment. "I wanted to say this face to face," he said. "I respect you. More than, more than her biological dad." I didn't answer right away. The waitress came by, topped off my coffee, gave Evan a look like she could tell this wasn't a casual breakfast. When she left, I said, "Respect's not something you say to make things better. It's something you live with." He nodded. "That's why I'm here." He told me his family had put the wedding on hold. Not canceled, not moved forward, just stopped. "We care about honesty," he said. "If a marriage starts with a lie, it doesn't stand much of a chance." I watched a snowplow crawl past outside, blade scraping sparks, jumping when it hit uneven pavement. "Kendra's scared," he added. "She doesn't know how to fix what she broke." I stirred my coffee slowly. Some things don't get fixed the way people want. He swallowed. "She asked me to tell you. She's sorry." That landed softer than I expected. "She didn't know how to say it herself," he continued. "So she sent this." He slid his phone across the table. A short message sat on the screen. "Thanks for everything. I didn't know how to hold both truths at once." I stared at it longer than I needed to. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "people think choosing one story means erasing another. That's not how it works." Evan nodded. "I'm still figuring things out." "So am I," said. We finished our coffee in silence. Not awkward, just honest. When I walked out into the cold afterward, the air felt sharp but clean, the kind that clears your head. I pulled my jacket tighter and stood there for a moment, watching my breath drift away. Marla called later that night. I didn't answer. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done living in the space where my worth depended on someone else saying my name. Weeks passed, then months. I settled into a smaller rhythm. Work, coffee, evenings quiet enough to hear myself think. I fixed things around the apartment that didn't need fixing, just to remind myself I still could. One morning, sitting in that same diner, I opened my pocket calendar and started planning ahead. Not big things, just normal ones. Oil change, doctor's appointment, a fishing trip I'd been putting off. Life unremarkable and solid. I thought about all the nights I stayed up waiting for Kendra to get home. All the bills paid without thanks. All the moments nobody saw. And I realized something that felt like peace. Being a father was never about a title. It was about showing up, staying steady, holding the line when it would have been easier to walk away. Even if in the end no one clapped. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt erased while still standing right there, take a moment to reflect. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about dignity, truth, and quiet strength, consider subscribing. Because sometimes the loudest thing a man can do is tell the truth and walk on.